This podcast is brought to you by 20th Century Studios' laugh-out-loud comedy Quiz Lady. Critics are calling it one of the funniest movies of the year. The New York Times says Sandra Oh shines, and Variety calls Awkwafina hilarious. For consideration in all Emmy categories, Quiz Lady, now streaming on Hulu. TV Academy members can watch the movie on DisneyStudiosAwards.com. Hi, everyone. Welcome back to the Prestige Junkie Podcast. I am Katey Rich. I'm the awards editor here at The Ankler, and today my co-host is the film critic at The Atlantic, the host of Blank Check, my friend David Sims.
What's up, Katie?
Thank you for joining me to talk about one of our many favorite topics in the world, which is how movies are performing and movies to take your kids to, both of which Inside Out 2 fits into perfectly.
Mm-hmm.
So we'll get there. And then later you'll hear a pair of conversations I had with Lisa Ann Walter and Sheryl Lee Ralph, who have bonded so closely as the co-stars on Abbott Elementary that, according to Lisa Ann, they have conversations that are basically just one word exchanged back and forth. And they're also super active in the Screen Actors Guild and pretty inspiring, I thought, when it came to the big existential questions that are still facing the industry. Which, David, are questions that you and I talk about plenty because everyone in Hollywood seems very scared, and you tend to be my optimist friend about the future of movies and how we're going to continue to have them. And I asked you a couple weeks ago to come on to talk about Inside Out 2, not realizing that this would be the weekend that everyone else got on board with you and thinking that movies are saved. Are movies saved because of Inside Out 2 performing so well?
Yes, movies were already fine. I think it's been such a strange year, and I'm not the first person to observe this, of after the strike, there was, I feel like widespread industry awareness of 2024 is going to be a little bit of a tough year. There's less product. Mm-hmm. It's a little more spread out. There's some kind of weird swings in there, right? Some of the classic tentpoles of your Marvel are not present, blah, 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 right?
Yeah, and therefore they're turning Furiosa and The Fall Guy into tentpoles when maybe they were not destined to be.
Right. And then it starts happening that the box office is down and some movies don't connect with audiences and people are like, are theatrical over? Is this it? Should we just, it doesn't make any sense. I know that in this business, people are always, it's what have you done for me lately? It's, if the last week didn't work out, then things must be going poorly. But the fact that people have already forgotten last summer that there were these genuine moments of excitement about going to the movie theater in the summer for films that were not sequels and just prequels and just legacy sequels and franchise movie. It's just
talking about Barbie and Oppenheimer. I guess is there a third one I'm forgetting about?
Examples, yes.
Yeah.
And then The Fall Guy, in retrospect, did fine for what it is, but was, in my opinion, a bit of an over budgeted film, right?
Sure.
With the experience it's giving, it feels like that's more of a $80 million movie than a $150 million movie or whatever it cost.
Yeah, currently it's made 87 domestic and it's a 169 total worldwide, which is, fine.
It's kind of hung around. Universal put it on VOD early. I'm sure that made them some more money. It's like studios have ways of kind of clearing up, and messes and finding where
I want to talk about VOD. Remind me to ask you about this again later.
But, and then Furiosa, underwhelming, was disappointing given that was a high quality movie. I like that movie, but I can understand why it was a bit of a tough sell. And so two movies kind of underperform and suddenly the world is ending. I will admit that I had this slight anxiety that movies for quote unquote grown-ups seem to have a bit of a ceiling for them.
Uh-huh.
Ceiling on them. Obviously you had hits this year like Challengers and Civil War where it's those overperformed relative to their smaller expectations and had a nice run in theaters and grown, but obviously those aren't making hundreds of millions of dollars.
Sure.
And it felt like sort of the more R-rated type blockbuster, like your Furiosas, maybe grown-ups were less interested in going to theaters versus a film like Godzilla X Kong, which is more broadly pitched at like teenagers and college kids and so on. Like, like that does fine, right? Because like that audience is still happy to go to a movie theater, but maybe older people are not. But then Bad Boys does great. That's an R-rated movie, right? Did
you see Bad Boys? Did you like it?
I sure did. Bad Boys is really good.
Okay, I gotta get there.
I'm a big fan of those guys, Dylan Bilal. Mm-hmm. I think they have like a lot of like the flair that doesn't feel like style for style's sake, unlike say David Leitch. Sorry.
I like the Fall Guy fine, but sure.
Yeah, I like the Fall Guy too. I liked it fine. I mean, maybe I had higher expectations for the Fall Guy than something like Bad Boys 4. But I just feel like Bad Boys 4, so it sort of has the spirit of like the Fast and Furious movies that we enjoyed, like when those films were
back
kind
when
of
we
at their
liked
peak.
Those.
This kind of like broadly comic, broadly emotional, silly crime saga stuff. So Bad Boys is, like doing actually quite well.
Yeah.
I would say more than fine.
Oh, yeah.
And then obviously this week you have Inside Out 2. Everyone sort of sweating like, oh, did Pixar hurt their brand? And oh, like, are families ever going to return to theaters? When it's like, there's plenty of evidence that families want to return to theaters. There's plenty of evidence that Pixar's brand is fine.
Well,
and yet we all tie ourselves in knots about this
we
stuff.
do tie ourselves in knots. I did get worried that Pixar had trained people, Disney in general had trained people to wait for things at home, had trained parents to think it was too much of a hassle and that there was going to be something on Disney Plus. This is anecdotal from like, I'm the parent who will take my kids to the movie theater opening weekend. I don't know a ton of other parents who prioritize that in the same way. But all of them seem, when I mention these movies, they're like, oh yeah, we should go do that. So I mean, and I don't know that it's over yet, right? Like, obviously, there's more better stuff on Disney Plus than there ever was at home for us when we were kids. Like, that habit is real. But it does seem like what I'm hearing anecdotally is not applied to the entire world. Who would have ever guessed that? And people are still, like, raring to go see these things.
I mean, from what I've heard, I did not. So I saw Inside Out 2 at a press screening, but I had, friends who took their kids to see it this weekend and said it was kind of like, it was intense. So, like people fighting for seats kind of vibes.
Yeah, I bet.
Which is obviously always really nice to hear. I don't think there's really any doubt that what Pixar did over the last few years in putting some of its tougher, swings, Turning Red, Soul,
Luca.
I mean, I don't want to just dismiss it as like, well, that was just a horrible decision by them. I know there were, especially with something like Soul, like, people, it was early
like
days.
December 2020. Like that was.
Yeah, it was hard to bet on people coming back to theaters and all that. But it created this bizarre sort of false narrative of like, well, people aren't as into the original Pixar movies and they only want the sort of legacy stuff. When in fact, like the legacy play that they made was Lightyear, which completely underwhelmed with everybody.
Yeah.
And the original movie that they put in theaters recently was Elemental, which I thought was stinky, but made a ton of money.
Yeah, it just cruised all summer last year.
Right. And like seems to have sort of like been broadly satisfying in the long run for like families and stuff. Like I think, Elemental has plenty of fans out there among younger viewers, right?
Well, my younger kid loved Elemental. Now he's decided he's grown out of it and hates it. So I don't know. Jury's still out in our house, but in general, yes, Elemental is popular. So it's just like the tea leaf reading that happens in Hollywood, and I'm as guilty of it as anyone, of like really feeling one weekend and really like being downcast about the next. Yeah, you love box office, despite your general optimism. Like you follow this horse race as much as the rest of us.
Yes. It just, the idea that the sort of, the idea of like, theaters will just never get the magic back. There's a ceiling. It's consistently proven wrong. And beyond that, the only real solution to Hollywood anxiety about like, why aren't people going to theaters enough is put more product in theaters.
Yeah.
Now, I know studios agree with me. Like I if you look down the development calendars, in the future, like they're planning to put things in theaters. This is we're no longer getting the signals of, in quarterly meetings of like, oh, no, streaming. Everyone has sort of come around, but that's what I think makes the doom and gloom sort of more baffling to me.
Well, there's nothing we can do about the amount of product for this year, right? Like this summer is going to be kind of empty. This coming weekend, I think the Bike Riders is the only wide release coming out. Like I like the Bike Riders a lot, but like I get that that's not going to do even Furiosa numbers probably.
Sure.
So I mean, it's just like is Stay Alive Till 25 the only thing that anybody can come up with? Or like could we continue to be surprised this summer by things like Inside Out 2?
Yeah, I think that the summer is now, the vibes of the summer are now by and large saved. Because if you look at the rest of the summer, you have Despicable Me on July 4th weekend. That seems like it's going to do fine. You have Deadpool and Wolverine near the end of July. That seems like it's going to do great.
Yeah.
So it's no longer going to be the end of the world if, say, like Twisters or A Quiet Place Part 1, like underwhelms a little, right?
I got a lot riding on Twisters personally. Like I need it to do well. I don't know if the industry does, but I do.
I think the Twisters will do fine, and Twisters seems good and fun, and I like the talent involved with it. And I think it's less objectionable, say, as like a legacy sequel, because it's like it's a tornado movie. Anything, there's nothing wrong with making another one of those.
They got twins, so that's all you need. 2 of them,
right? But I just feel like the biggest tentpoles performing well just takes a little bit of pressure off your Twisters, right? Like now the future of cinema does not rest on the shoulders of Twisters.
Yeah.
I was talking to my co-host, Griffin Newman.
Who cares a lot about all this stuff.
He does. He tends to be a little less rose-tinted maybe than I am. But he has the point that the word tentpole, there's only supposed to be a few of those holding up the tent. That's literally where the idea comes from. You need about 4. To hold up a tent. You need a few tent poles. And then there's just supposed to be plenty of other stuff kind of coasting on the rest of the box office. Like you see this week Inside Out 2 doing really well, but then you also actually see a lot of the other films in theaters doing all right as sort of runoff. And this is what happened obviously with Barbieheimer. Because people are going to the movies. So like maybe they get shut out of Inside Out 2 and they end up somewhere else or whatever. Maybe they see a poster for Planet of the Apes and they're like, oh yeah, I meant to go to that. Let's come back for that sometime.
Yeah. I mean, Planet of the Apes had a 4% drop this past weekend. Like people are just getting around to it, which I think is something we kind of pretended people didn't do anymore.
Yeah, I think, again, because things swung towards opening weekend is king and like that's where it's make or break. People maybe swung a little too far in that direction of thinking, and you see films holding maybe a little better, especially films like Fall Guy, where it's like, yeah, that's an audience that doesn't run to the theater and maybe never did, right? Like that's a little more of a like you'll get them when you get them audience.
So the Fall Guy in VOD, this is where I kind of start to go nuts, where we, talk so much about how much these movies cost. And, and there's plenty of reason to like hope that these studios make money. We want people to keep their jobs. If you're listening to this and you work at Warner Brothers, you care about this. But like the Fall Guy is making money on VOD that we never see. We have no idea how much money that is. So to try to sit back and say whether or not it made a profit is so pointless that it kind of drives me nuts.
The thing, obviously, this is something Universal, especially post-pandemic, has really focused on, where they will get a movie on PVOD quick, right? They'll put it on premium rental for $25 or whatever. And I have whined to Universal about this, being like, hey, come on, what are you guys doing putting the Fabelmans on,
Yeah, the
on
Fabelmans
demand?
is the one I go back to a lot.
And they have always said to me, and I believe them, I don't think they're like, selling me a bridge. Like, it's kind of two audiences. Your theater audience and your PVOD audience are not really like, they don't really cannibalize each other. And it's just extra money that can be made quick on people who are really eager to see something at their home, like, within a few weeks.
Yeah.
I philosophically still just kind of believe in the window. Like, I kind of wish we could bring back the sort of strict 45-day, like, things are in theaters until, like, that would be the norm.
Yeah.
I believe that, like, I remember a movie like The Northman, when was that, a couple years ago? Everyone at Universal, that was a Focus film, I guess.
Yeah.
Was it Focus?
I think it was
so
Focus.
funny to think of that as a
know.
Focus film.
I know.
told me like, but it really cleaned up on PVOD. Like that really helped make up the budget for that one, blah, blah, blah. I guess I have to believe it. But yes, analysts like you and I then are frustrated. It's like, well, then how do I know, what kind of a reach this had? Like, how do I know what the hit was? And I have long sort of defaulted to the assumption of like Hollywood tends to figure out how to limit its losses. So yes, you have a couple sort of mega flops a year where there's nothing to be done.
Sure.
Something like The Fall Guy, where you look at the global take, you look at the budget, and you're kind of like, I imagine that between streaming rights, international sales, and video on demand, like they just kind of figured this out. Like, it's just, this is not some giant loss for them.
Maybe not for Furiosa, but probably for The Fall Guy.
Right. Furiosa feels that's a bit of a tougher pill to swallow. But and then of course, as many in Hollywood will tell you, and as this is the main reason theaters still exist, when something like Inside Out 2 happens, there's nothing comparable in terms of just like the pure profit you're taking in, like
the endless
and that
cash
is of
flow.
course that's what you're in the game for, right? Is suddenly it's like you're just clearing hundreds of millions in profit. And God bless, like again, like you say, we want people to have jobs and we want theaters to be open, like, so I'm really not begrudging any hits right now. Like a movie like If, that did not seem that appealing to me, I was like rooting hard for it. I'm like, original family movies in theaters, like let's go after it.
It just crossed $100 million domestic, so
that's true. They did.
Good for you. If I still haven't managed to see that one,
neither have I.
Maybe we'll get there someday.
So I'm part of the problem. I should be getting out to see If.
I mean, Disney, like 2019 being like this high watermark right before the pandemic, where like Disney itself was just raking in cash with like tentpole after tentpole. Like I think they have struggled for various differing reasons since then. Like Inside Out 2 itself is not going to change any strategy there, but like does that put them in a good position to, move past the Marvel era, figure out what they want to do with Star Wars? Like I think Disney's important almost more than any other studio in terms of making sure entertainment for our kids or for people in general actually works out. Like, are we feeling better about their direction, or should they be?
I don't know. The Disney direction is, I think that like the break that Marvel is taking is a wise one. I think you would agree,
yes,
right?
Absolutely.
Like when you see something like the Marvels, doing so poorly, it's not because the Marvels was a product that wasn't appealing. You're seeing the kind of cumulative effect.
It's not because of woke. You're not going to say it's just because they shouldn't put women in superhero movies, because those guys are out there.
You're seeing, in my opinion, the cumulative effect of like a couple Marvel movies in a row, like kind of not going over.
Yeah.
So even when Ant-Man 3 does, okay business, the knock on of that is bad because nobody really liked it. And you're sort of, you're losing the luster of like, you got to see these things in a theater.
Yeah.
You got it, right? You got to rush to a Marvel movie. So the break is wise, but I have yet to sort of get a sense of whether the break has, whether the lessons have been learned.
Whether it's taught them anything that these movies
both
didn't.
This and Star Wars, right? This sort of two big Disney boy properties, like where I'm like, there doesn't totally seem to be a plan in place for the future that's like, and here's how it'll be different after we kind of exhausted the audience's interest in both of these properties.
Yes.
Which is undeniably kind of what happened. With Marvel, it felt inevitable. It's like, you cannot do this forever. You can't, you're trying to keep all these balls in the air for more than 10 years. Like that's never been done. Like, of course, eventually people will tire of the endless storyline. With Star Wars, it felt a little more like, how are you guys kind of like swinging in the dirt for this? This is Star Wars. Like, just make one of these every 3 years. Like, you can probably get people.
It does feel like they're in a more dire place on Star Wars. Having not watched The Acolyte, which I think people like, but maybe not as much as they wish they did.
I like The Acolyte,
Okay.
and I think The Acolyte is, if you're going to make a Star Wars television show, I think is the wise direction to go in, of like, really set it in a different era and have it really not connect to much and, play in a new space there. But in the larger sense of like, Star Wars feels very diluted and a lot of this stuff feels easy to ignore. Maybe that's a problem.
Yes. Yeah. And that was a Marvel thing too, right? Like, you don't have to watch Falcon and the Winter Soldier. So then like you might be off the track entirely.
Like, right. And so these are all problems generated by a streaming economy that was very feverish and is now less so, but you still got to put stuff on these platforms that you're paying so much money for.
Yeah.
And I don't know what the answer is there. Like, and Disney does feel like the company with the most at stake there because they're tending to these large gardens within gardens. Mm-hmm. They have to tend to the Marvel garden and to the Star Wars. Like, it's why Universal or even, I mean, Warner Brothers obviously has plenty of sort of company drama happening, but Universal or someone can just be like, yeah, like we can pivot our like sort of general like blockbuster direction with ease. We can try some new stuff. Mm-hmm. We can bring in movie stars. We can bring in your Christopher Nolans. Like we're a robust enterprise over here. With Disney, I feel like they always have to be fending off like, okay, yeah, sure. Okay, Pixar got a hit. Good job by you guys. But like, what's the deal with the 4 other gigantic, properties you have?
The other tiles on the Disney Plus home screen. They all have to be tended to at once.
Look, I have a 3-year-old daughter. I use Disney Plus every single day.
Mm-hmm. Same.
I hope that makes them happy. Like, it's there and it works.
They're watching you and they're very grateful for your support.
I could never be rid of it.
No. Yeah, we've been on a Pixar kick after seeing Incredibles 2, which has been seeing Inside Out 2. And now my older son is watching The Incredibles. So I really feel like the work has been done. Inside Out 2 is just branching off, making more and more money for the Pixar enterprise. Good job, guys. I
mean, I think that's what Pete Docter said, right, in this sort of press. It was very interesting to see him in the run-up to Inside Out 2's release kind of stake the company's future to it a little bit.
Oh, wow. And he didn't direct it, which I didn't realize until I got to the end of Inside Out 2 and saw someone else's name.
No, I think he has sort of retired from directing because he's kind of in charge over there right now.
Oh, yeah.
But for him to basically be saying out loud, like, look, if this doesn't success, then there's something about our model that clearly isn't working anymore. And I understand why he felt that way. Like, yeah, if Inside Out 2 underwhelms, it's kind of like, what do you guys
people
want anymore? Like, I get it.
Yeah.
I don't know what the reaction to Inside Out 2, it did sensationally well. Like, let's order sequels to everything.
Sure.
Like, if that's what it is, like, I don't know if that's what Pixar should be doing.
Yeah.
But they have an original film next year. If they keep sprinkling stuff like that in, I'm not too anxious.
Yeah.
And I think that the push should really just be like, yes, lean back on theaters. Your streaming library that just helps build out interest, and like you're saying, like, and helps grow new generations of kids who are going to want to see Elemental 2 when there's a poster for it in a theater, right? And they're like, yeah, we got to go to that.
I mean, Moana 2, my God, like that trailer is an event in our house. Like we're going to be there Thursday night previews probably.
I mean, it's so sick for me to say this, but no craven corporate pivot thrilled me more than Bob Iger swooping in and saying, why are you making a Moana TV show? Can you just like stitch that together into a movie, please? Whatever it takes, because we need to put that in a theater. Like,
I know.
Was that an artistically sound decision? We'll find out. Like, maybe not. Like, maybe Moana 2 will feel a little dinky. I don't know.
It might, but that trailer makes me cry. I'm so excited to see it.
We love Moana. She's the queen of the sea.
Mm-hmm.
But just the sort of fevered feeling of like, why would we not put that in a theater?
Yeah.
Are you guys nuts? Like just suggests to me that, everyone has seen the light a little bit.
Yeah. Okay, to pivot it back to awards, because that's sort of the topic of this podcast, and to wrap it up, at the Oscars, animated sequels don't do as well in the animated feature category as they might. I guess Toy Story 4 and Toy Story 3 are the exceptions. I'm scanning through Wikipedia. I don't know. How much have you paid attention to the animated feature race ahead so far? You want to make any predictions by Inside Out 2 here?
Well, so there's this film coming out later in the year. It's a DreamWorks film. Is it called like The Wild Robot?
Yes.
The Wild Robot is coming out. That, which is a DreamWorks film. Mm-hmm. It's from Chris Sanders, who's the guy who did Lilo and Stitch and How to Train Your Dragon. So and The Croods. But, so he's like a big animation name.
Yeah.
And it feels like the kind of original blockbuster animation that category is often very fond of, right? Like,
yes, it's based on a book which I have read with my kid and is great and really beautiful and really well made. And like it lends itself so well to what looks like a really cleverly animated movie. It's coming out in September, which I have no inside information here, but it's coming out in September and they really want critics to like it. Is there an event in September where like critics tend to gather like in a location where like it might get even more attention? Like
I imagine it could be in Toronto. Yes, that seems plausible to me.
Yeah. Well, The Boy and the Heron premiered there last year, and that was a big deal. So that's certainly a path that would make sense to take.
Obviously, The Boy and the Heron had the major prestige vibe. This is a serious auteur, and it was the opening film. But The Wild Robot. Absolutely right. Like you say, sequels tend to be less of interest to Oscar voters, right? Like there is that automatic sequel bias.
Yeah.
Yes, of course, there are some few exceptions, but usually when a sequel is triumphing, like Toy Story 4, it's a year where there was just nothing else that really broke out, and so they, they swing that way. I imagine Inside Out 4. I mean, Inside Out 4 is a sensation, so it'll be getting an Oscar nomination.
Yeah.
The robot movie will get an Oscar nomination. This movie, Orion in the Dark, that was on Netflix, that feels like kind of the Netflix movie of the year, right?
I hope they qualified it. It's pretty good. I don't know if you saw that one.
I think they did. Netflix, it feels like always has a solid couple of entries there. There's always some foreign or indie animated work that we kind of don't see coming.
Yeah, like Robot Dreams this past year, which we saw a trailer for at the Draft House ahead of Inside Out 2, and it definitely had everybody's interest peaked.
Yeah, it's a nice little movie.
Yeah. The other thing we saw a trailer for before Inside Out 2 was the Pharrell biopic Piece by Piece made with Legos. Have you seen this trailer?
Yes, I have.
Do you know? Both my kids were interested, which very much surprised me. I was like, do you know that's a real person? They're like, sure. They don't care if it's got Legos in it. Maybe this movie is going to be huge.
Look. It's Morgan Neville.
Yep.
Obviously, a guy who kind of knows what he's doing, I would say. I, too, saw the trailer. I saw it in front of Bad Boys for Life.
Sure.
My audience, no, whatever it's called, Bad Boys Ride or Die. My audience, I would say, nonplussed by that trailer. I think part of the reason for the Lego pitch was that it was kind of assembled during COVID, and Neville like interviewed people, and they were and they were like, "What if we do this animated?" I'm not sure the total story there.
Like turning a Zoom call into an animated film, sure.
I mean, how rude am I allowed to be?
That's your choice. I don't have to agree.
I think it looks a little stupid, but I guess I'm willing to be proven wrong.
It might have been what we said about the Lego movie.
Swing.
Yeah. Yeah, you kind of want, like, it may as well make it an animated Lego biopic. Like, why not? We like big swings around here.
Yeah.
I think I might join you in predicting The Wild Robot as the animated feature heavyweight, but I like that there's surprise in this category. Like, it felt like for a while, like Pixar would just march to victory every single time. And I think the fact that has changed is like partly them making more sequels and partly like really good animation coming from all over. So it feels like there's a lot more to anticipate.
I think it'll be a pretty good year. I if you're asking me to pick a winner this far out, the Wild Robot thingy.
I think you're the first person I've had on the podcast where I've just forced you to make an Oscar prediction way too early. So congratulations.
It just feels like they like a movie that's a hit, but it doesn't have to be the biggest hit of the year. They like a movie that has some artistry.
Yeah.
And so on and so forth. And then like last year, I feel like everyone would have picked Spider-Verse to win, right? As an acclaimed, hit of 2023. But the sequel thing does, I think, hold some voters back. And
totally.
And obviously you also had this very well-received film as a competitor.
Yeah. No, that's the International Academy for you, right? That they are the ones who are going to say, yes, Miyazaki, we're going to give you a second Oscar that you will not show up for again as a true king.
Yeah.
David, thank you for joining me to talk box office. Please come back soon.
I will be back anytime you want me. Honestly, Katey, this is fun.
Yay.
And I'm glad to rant. I need everyone to hear me rant. Everything's fine, guys.
You don't have enough microphones to talk into. You got to just
Seriously.
Spread the word far and wide. This podcast is brought to you by 20th Century Studios' Laugh Out Loud comedy Quiz Lady. Critics are calling it one of the funniest movies of the year. The New York Times says Sandra Oh shines, and Variety calls Awkwafina hilarious. For consideration in all Emmy categories, Quiz Lady, now streaming on Hulu. TV Academy members can watch the movie on DisneyStudiosAwards.com. So now let's hear the conversations I had with two of the stars of Abbott Elementary, which returned for its third season earlier this year after a strike-induced hiatus. I spoke first with Lisa Ann Walter and then with Sheryl Lee Ralph, neither of whom spent the strike just sitting around. They're both very involved in the Screen Actors Guild, and they even traveled together for a rally in Philadelphia with local members of SAG. Lisa Ann was also on the SAG negotiating committee, so I really wanted to start our conversation by digging into some of those big, weighty topics that have the industry scared and that aren't necessarily resolved entirely. You might be able to guess which big idea is still weighing on her for the future. We also talked about her stand-up comedy career and the ground she broke there and how her great red carpet fashion connects to that. And then I got into her work-wife relationship with Sheryl, which led really nicely, of course, to my conversation with Sheryl Lee Ralph. Sheryl is an Emmy winner for her role as Barbara Howard on Abbott Elementary. And like Lisa Ann, she has been working in the industry a really long time, which has put her in an interesting position now where she's being offered a whole lot of stuff. And she admitted to me she has FOMO about saying no to some of this stuff and has to tell herself it's okay. And we also talked about her experience on the SAG picket lines, her thoughts on the future of the industry, and then some of the words of wisdom that she shares with her co-stars and herself, and now with the rest of us. I really loved talking to both of them. I would like to hang out with them together next time, please. So now here, my conversations with the stars of Abbott Elementary, Lisa Ann Walter, and then Sheryl Lee Ralph. So, Lisa, this time last year, you were gearing up for a strike and then getting deeply involved in a strike. I would say it was not an especially restful summer or time away from the set of Abbott Elementary. How is this summer feeling now that you're about a year out of it? Do you feel like you've recovered from that incredibly tumultuous time last year?
Wow. Thank you for starting with that. You know, I was at a roundtable, variety roundtable for supporting actors or panel. And the first thing that somebody said to me when the panel was done, it was a person from Variety who came up to me and said, "Thank you so much for your activism." And I thought that she meant for the ERA or for reproductive rights or for there's so many activisms that I do. And then she said, "You were so involved in the strike last year and the negotiation, being on the negotiation committee. And I swear to you, it took me a second to remember." I was like, strike, what the, that was just last year. Because it seems like so much happened. Being in the negotiating room for 8 hours to 12 hours a day, and then going right back to work the second that it ended. And it went right from that into the award season, that it has been, I am not kidding, a blur.
Yeah. Well, it feels like there's still the kind of this overwhelming mood of worry in Hollywood. I mean, there's, the box office is having a hard time. Like there's projects that got put on hold by the strikes. AI kind of keeps coming around the bend. And I think you've been frank about how the SAG contract had a lot of victories, maybe not all of the victories that should have been there. Are there things that still linger with you that you feel like are the next battle for actors or that are going to come up in the next year or two that you've really got your mind on?
AI.
Yeah, I figured.
Because once technology is there, it's going to be used. The battle is to use it in a way that doesn't cut out the people that actually provided the voices, like we're seeing in the Scarlett Johansson suit right now. Yeah, I mean, first of all, how much do you love the fact that she's always there going, that's not what we said. Like she has become Little Miss, I got a contract. And this is what it says. And we are going to do this the right way. God bless her. But I think that when we started with the negotiation, they wanted no language. And we were like, well, we can't do that. We've seen what happens. I've been to this carnival, fellas. Remember when it went from VHS to DVD? I remember clearly because I know what my check said when I was getting VHS residuals for The Parent Trap. and what the difference was when it went to DVD.
Oh, really? So that would have been really soon after The Parent Trap. So you watched that happen.
Exactly, in real time. It went from, wow, I'm going to do okay this, even if I don't have a job, I did okay. And then the next one was like, well, where'd that money go? Wow. And it was because they did this funny little finagling where they said, well, we don't know if anybody's going to buy these DVD player things. And of course they know. They've already phased out VHS. They've already transitioned everything over. And they're like, well, we'll just, if it does well, then I don't know why I went into like Foghorn Leghorn, but, then we'll cut you guys in, you little actor fellas. But of course it was that's the way the business was going to go. And they knew it. And I kept saying, when I was not as involved in union stuff, why don't we just do a formula where they give us X% of their profits, or maybe not profits, maybe it's intake because they cooked books, as we all know.
Sure.
But if they give us a percentage and the percentage stays the same, then even if your technology transitions, we don't get cut out. Just give us the same amount. So
yeah,
there you go.
When the strike was happening, I feel like you really came forward a lot with your personal stories about, what it takes to have a career as an actor, how, you can be in a hit movie, but not necessarily make a living. Had you been that frank about it before? Like, was that a moment for you of really being like, I can come forward with this stuff? Because so often I feel like you're supposed to project the success as an actor that might not be real.
Right.
Was that a shift for you during the strike, or did that shift happen sooner where you felt like you could talk about the stuff and needed to talk about it?
I feel like I've talked about it all the way along, because the one thing that I've always been in my career is honest. It's just that there weren't microphones in front of my face because I wasn't on a hit show. Every single day that I'm out there in the world, I get love for The Parent Trap. Or, sometimes it's stand up or this or that, but usually it was The Parent Trap. From Quinta, it was Bruce Almighty. That was her movie that she loved.
Yeah.
But I could not go a day without somebody telling me how much they loved it. And if those residuals weren't coming in and I didn't book another job for whatever reason, I stayed booking movies for quite a long time. And then you get to an age where they're like, okay, who's the next Lisa? Oh, it's Catherine Hahn. I knew.
Does she know that? Have you guys talked about that?
Oh, listen, people were coming up to me. Oh, I have a funny story about that. But people were coming up to me when she started to book the funny female. I called it Ingenue's funny friend, or Ingenue's fat funny friend. It depends on how much weight I had to lose that month. But somebody came up to me and said, there's somebody getting your roles in the movies. And they meant Catherine. And I went, nope, those were my roles 15 years ago. They're hers now. But she came up to me at an Emily's List events, Emily's List, and said, my husband thinks it's me in The Parent Trap. I cannot convince him it's not. I was like, good, fine. Does he like the movie? If he likes it, then go with that. I'm all right with that.
You guys should bring her on Abbott. She could play a relative. There's so many of Melissa's relatives.
When I was in the Scarlet Witch costume for it might have been the first Halloween that we did. I was bombarded with people that were fans of that universe saying, oh my God, you've got to go on Agatha now. I'm like, all right,
that's true.
Call me. I'm down.
A crossover event.
Yeah, exactly.
I mean, you've talked about how when you were doing stand-up, when you had, young children, you made motherhood a part of your work, and like nobody was doing that at this point. And now, you've got Ali Wong with like this incredible career was talking about that stuff. Like, do you feel like we've gotten somewhere? Are you able to talk about this stuff in your work now in a way that you weren't to? Like, how have you watched that change happen in terms of how we let mothers talk about being mothers in society at all?
Well, I like to think in a couple of ways I was groundbreaking. I did not ever think about what I'm allowed to talk about. There are things that I did that no other female comic was doing at the time, and I did it because that's what I was living. Childbirth was one of them. One of the reasons I started doing stand-up, because I was an actress before I did stand-up, and, as for a living, I, got paid to act. But I started doing it because there was a boom. I had just had a baby. And the way I talked about it was really funny. And I didn't see any women doing it. I saw Bill Cosby doing it. I saw him telling his wife's childbirth story. And I was like, why is this a purview of men? I talked about stuff that absolutely was relatable to women that women weren't talking about. And the other thing that I did was wear a sexy outfit while I was talking about it. Every woman in those days was wearing what I called the ubiquitous David Byrne big shoulder jacket. Everybody looked like they were the lead singer of the Talking Heads, if you don't get the reference. They would just wear these giant 80s shoulders, cover up every bit of femininity, and, sometimes a skirt, but the giant jacket covered everything. And I was working, my home club in New York was the comic strip, and Lucian Hold was the artistic director there. And he said, Lisa, he has this great voice, why do you wear the falderall, the high heels, the short skirt? They're not going to listen to what you're talking about. And I said, well, that'll save me a lot of work then, if all they want to do is look at me and throw dollar bills on the stage. And I got TV show offers. So, and part of that is because they were like, oh, here's a girl who's I'm not the prettiest actress that ever walked by any means, or the sexiest, but I was somebody that men appreciated and enjoyed. And many of them would come up and say, I don't like female comics, but I like you. I knew what that meant. That meant I don't want to bone those other ones, but I'd like to bone you. And, oh, by the way, also, you make me laugh. But I'm fine with it.
Oh, and if it's not like overly forward thing to say, I feel like you're still working cleavage really well. Like your award show looks are incredible. And I'm like about to turn 40 and I feel like, oh, I'm supposed to cover up at this age. And you're fighting back against that in this fantastic way.
Well, thank you. I don't want to go to where it's like ridiculous. I feel like I would say I don't want to go to where it embarrasses my kids, but I feel like that ship has sailed so long ago that I just am. What I want to do is remind people there was a long period in my career where I've said this before, but I kept getting offered this role, the girl in the procedural who sticks her head out of the trailer with a cigarette and said, I didn't kill him, but I ain't sorry he's dead. And I'm like, okay, I know, we all know I can do the sassy. We all know I can do that. What I would love is if they understood that my father was a NASA geophysicist. He was a doctor, Walter, and my mother was a genius, and, I could win Celebrity Jeopardy. If they actually let me have a brain to go along with this. And ethnic girls with curvy bodies can either play maternal or tramp. You don't get to be the scientist in the James Bond movie. So now the goal is now to cover up so that I can be a serious actress again.
Oh, there you go.
And also, I have to be honest, Quinta, remember, she's growing up and seeing me in movies. So when I show up and it's all June is busting out all over, I think she's a little like, she always compliments me when I'm a little more covered up. So I aim to make her happy. But when I tried on that Michael Costello dress for the SAG Awards with the cutouts with the underboob, I was like, this looks so hot. I am going to wear, this might be the last time in my life that I wear something like this. One last time.
Gotta go for it.
One last time.
I'm talking to Sheryl Ralph tomorrow as part of this episode. And, you guys have done interviews together. Like you were on a red carpet kind of tearing up, talking about her, advice that she's giving you about how you talk about yourself. And can you just give me a glimpse into that work-wife relationship on a day-to-day basis? Like, what does that look like when you guys report to set and kind of, build that friendship over these seasons?
Now we're in a place where the entire conversation back and forth does not need more than a word from each. It's something like, girl, I know, but really, relax. It'll be something like that. And that will say the entire thing because we both know what we're referencing. But generally what it is we show up and, I'll either bang on her door as I walk by to go to my dressing room, or she'll stick her head out and yell into the hall and, Lisa, come down, talk to me. And then I'll come and pop by and we'll do whatever thing that we have to take care of because we're in business together on a project. But mostly it's just, what is the plan for the next thing coming up? I feel safe talking to her about anything in the world and vice versa, and know that my secret will be kept. She cannot help but give advice because that's what she does. And that's fine with me because generally it's quite good. But I do let her and allow her to not have to be the person uplifting me, because every room she walks into, the expectation is that Miss Sheryl Lee Ralph will inspire you. And it is exhausting. And she knows I know that. And I will tell her, like, you tired? Yeah. I'm like, well, it's a tiring thing holding up the entire world on your shoulder. Yeah. Every single job she gets, she has to go and inspire rooms full of people. So I just tell her, you don't have to with me. Just sit there. And we watch TCM. We watch Turner Classic Movies.
What are your TCM favorites? Do you guys have any specific titles?
I mean, I know what mine are. I keep a list on my phone, but I'll just tell you off the top of my head. The Lion in Winter, all of the Thin Man movies, most of the screwball movies of the 30s, the Irene Dunn, Cary Grant, Katharine Hepburn, Bringing Up Baby, Philadelphia Story, My Man Godfrey, even something like His Girl Friday. His Girl Friday is a fantastic movie with Rosalind Russell and Cary Grant, and everyone else in the cast is so good. And what's wild about it is the snappy repartee, something I love to this day. It's why I love when we do it on Abbott. When we have the whole cast in the teacher's lounge firing on all cylinders, everybody with their a bit of crazy. We literally do it like starting a car. We do it, the camera sees where they need to go. They see where they might go for a reaction. It speeds up, it speeds up, it speeds up, and then it's like bam, 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 firing on all cylinders. And it is the most fun that I have on Abbott because it reminds me of that.
I wanted to rewind a little bit because on this episode, I also spoke with Lisa Ann Walter yesterday, and I was looking at the pictures of you guys when you went to the SAG, the strike rally in Philadelphia last summer.
Yes.
When I wanted to ask what being there specifically meant to you, because I think regional actors, people outside of New York and LA, get so overlooked as working actors, and that seems like something that both of you guys really knew deserved emphasis of, that these are all part of the acting family who needed the support of the strike. What did that mean for you?
Listen, I'm first vice president of the LA local of SAG-AFTRA. And if there's one thing I know, being a part of leadership of the largest local chapter in the country, is that just because you're the largest doesn't mean that you ignore the others. You have to really know that we are all in this together. So for me, it was important to go out and visit other regions. And we chose Philadelphia. One, because, my husband is Senator Vincent Hughes there in Philadelphia, and the fact that it is the home city of Abbott Elementary. So we chose to go to Philadelphia, and it was the right thing to do.
How have you been feeling since being back at work? When the strike ended, you and the Abbott cast, you guys got to go right back on set. But, you talk to people in the business and things are slow coming back. There's still that uncertainty. I mean, how are you just feeling about what progress has been made since the strike ended? Are we on a good path?
I think we're absolutely on a good path. It just happens to be a different path. The industry is changing right before our eyes. And if there's one thing I've known, change, no matter what it is, no matter where it happens, is very difficult. People don't like change. On either side, people don't like change, and it's hard for people to change, but change is inevitable. I think about things like in my grandparents' generation, the introduction of the telephone. The telephone was supposed to be an instrument of the devil. The fact that it was going to ruin families. People weren't going to choose to talk to each other face to face. They were going to choose to talk between wires. Television, once again, was going to be an instrument of the devil. It was going to take people away from sitting down and listening to the radio and having, creative conversations or creative listening of stories in their minds. Now they were going to see them on TV. It was an instrument of the devil. So change, no matter who you are, no matter what you are, is very difficult. And just as some people lose, some people will gain. We have this huge talk and conversation around AI. If you know what Chat GPT is, you're already using it.
Mm-hmm.
So AI is already becoming a part of your life. If you talk to your phone and it writes down what it is you're saying, you're already using it in some form or fashion. And these things are very hard because, like I said, some will lose and somebody will gain. So when it comes to our industry that is actually changing in front of our eyes, when we see that young people, thank God they are watching Abbott Elementary, but they have found different ways to watch TV. They stream. That is what they do, and they watch it when they want it on the screen that they want to watch it on. That's change. We're seeing the change happen. And look, a lot of people don't like change. They don't want to accept it. But there's one thing I know, change is inevitable. And change, for the most part, is important. And I welcome change in the many differences of my life.
Yeah. I was going to ask if a career like yours, looking at your list of credits where you go one episode on one TV show and 2 episodes on another, and you're kind of coming in and out of these shows, if that teaches you to be more adaptable and kind of expect change, because it's part of the process, right?
Oh, absolutely. I'll never forget when I was shooting a series for Nickelodeon called Instant Mom. And at the same time, I was shooting a series called Ray Donovan. 2 very different shows. And I was literally shooting one in the morning, and then sometimes I would have to shoot the other one at night.
Oh, God.
So it's not so much about adaptability as much as the task and the belief that I must hone my craft as an artist has done me well to be able to adapt and move from one process to the next process when it comes to acting. That's why I don't read scripts. When I come to the table read, I am literally reading the script for the first time at the table because I'm honing that craft of something called a cold read. And a cold read is when they give you the script right away and you're expected to deliver the performance. So I'm always working on that.
When you've played Barbara for this long, do the cold reads become less cold? Can you just look at it and kind of know how Barbara would say this automatically after playing her for so long?
You know what? It hasn't been that long. It's really only been 2.5 seasons. It only looks like 3 seasons because our 3rd season was curtailed by the strike. And in many ways, I'm very, very thankful because as an actor, very often you can be in a show, on TV, in movies, on stage, and you get your note to play. And I'm so thankful to the writers and the powers that be that in Barbara Howard, I've gotten a whole symphony. I get to play so many different notes. In this 3rd season, I learned more about the vulnerability of Barbara Howard, but at the same time, I was like, wait a minute, she can leap tall buildings in a single bound. It was such a very physical season for my character, so much so that I said to one of the writers, I said, why don't you ask your mother to do this next season? Oh, yeah.
That doesn't sound like a challenge you shrink away from, though.
Oh, not at all.
If it's written down, it's there.
Absolutely. And it was so funny because one of them said, well, once you didn't say anything, we figured, oh, yeah, she got this. She can do this. I was like, oh, my gosh. So you mean I didn't have to run that relay? You mean I didn't have to play basketball? You mean I didn't have to jump down and scoot through that tunnel? I didn't have to do it. I just had to say that. Oh, but anyway, we did it.
Yeah. You've talked in other interviews about the wig, the barber wig, kind of having a life of its own. And I think you told Lisa Ann that people don't recognize you because they're not used to seeing you without it. Does that wig and the pearls kind of help you go more incognito in real life? Is there a benefit there?
You know what? I love when they mistake me for Janelle James. I
Because
love
of the
it.
long hair.
I'm just like, oh my God, thank you for confusing me with a woman who is what, maybe 25, 30 years younger than I am. Thank you very much. I appreciate that. But the wig does have a life of its own. You know, every time I ask about changing it just a little bit, they're like, absolutely not. And I'm like, oh, okay, people love it. And the way we got to the pearls was Sue, who is our costume designer, who's done just such an excellent job of getting the actual dress for the characters by literally shopping where these characters would shop. So, you know, sometimes I'm in there and it's like a rack of Ross and TJ Maxx, and I'm just like, well, of course it is. You know, and if you see the designer label, it's like, yeah, is it Marshalls or TJ Maxx? Where is it? You know, so I'm really loving the fact that she leans into that. To me, it just makes for absolute magic.
So now that you're in this position where you're on Abbott, you've got this visibility, you've got a job, but you'll also presumably have a lot of other opportunities that are coming your way and people who want to work with you. How are you figuring that out? How do you make the time, and how are you making choices that are different from how you would have a couple years ago?
You know, now there are bigger choices to be made. Like I have a film coming out with Bette Midler called The Fabulous Four, and that will be coming out in July. And that just came to me. They're like, no, we want to work with you. And I was like, okay, great. You know, a lot of it is my doing speaking engagements, so many more speaking engagements. And then once you do one, the next group is like, oh, we heard such and such and such and such, and we got to have you here. And I'm like, wow, you know, so what it is I'm just getting to do so much more of what I love to do. And I've just learned, though, that I suffer from FOMO, fear of missing out. And now I have to temper that fear and know everything always works out. It's fine. You can say no. You can take a break. You can relax. You can do this. So just go on and do it. But the playing field, it's much larger now, and it's exciting.
Yeah. When I imagine after having periods as an actor where you weren't working as much, the idea of saying no is kind of hard to adapt to. That, you know, being in that, it's a role reversal that might take some adjusting.
Oh, God, Katey, thank you for understanding. Exactly. That's it. You know, there have been times when, okay, certainly as a Black actress, the role would come out and you know that everybody that even halfway looks like you, they're all going out for that one role. And you want to be prepared and ready for it. So you get it. That's a part of that. You don't want to miss out.
One closing question, another one I got from talking to Lisa Ann yesterday.
Oh my God, Lisa Ann.
But she said you guys watch TCM together, that's kind of a bonding experience of these old movies. And she told me some of her favorites, and I just wanted to hear yours. What are your kind of classics that you go back to?
When I was a little girl, there was this movie called Black Orpheus. Mm-hmm. And when Black Orpheus came on, it takes place in Brazil. And there were all these beautiful shades of Black people. They were in love. They were out of love. They had undying love. They were singing. They were dancing. They were gorgeous. And that was a time when the great movies would come on once a year. And oh my God, I love that movie to this day. I love Raisin in the Sun. When I think of that movie and this family moving up, moving out of poverty and going towards their life's dreams together, understanding that sometimes people will fail and make mistakes, but you're family and you've got to forgive each other and move forward together. Oh my God, I love that movie. Then there's this actress. Oh my, Susan, her name is Susan. But anyway, it's a movie called I Want to Live.
Oh, Susan Hayward. Yeah.
Susan Hayward.
Mm-hmm.
When you see To Kill a Mockingbird and you listen to the words,
Mm-hmm.
These
old
are
movies
just
have it all.
old movies. And sometimes in these movies, you're not seeing the blood, the gore. You're not seeing the attack, but you're seeing it.
Mm-hmm.
It's right here in your mind's eye. Sometimes I just watch them, and I know this is crazy, and people always say I'm crazy. Gone with the Wind.
Some people say that they can't watch, that it's hard to watch, and you can't blame them. But you go back to it.
You cannot blame them, but sometimes I just have to watch Gone with the Wind. Just like Who Knows Why, I will never turn away from The Godfather, 1, 2, 3, 4, and 25. There's some parts every time when I know certain things are going to be said, I mute it because I don't want to hear it. Then I unmute it and I watch it again. But some of these things, they're just such great cinema. And if you ever get to watch, not because I'm in it, but there's a movie by Charles Burnett called To Sleep with Anger. And it's just a simple story, but just so good, so good. So I guess you can see I like movies.
Well, Charles Burnett, his movies weren't always easy to get to, but now we're in this period where a lot of these classic movies, they're not on TV once a year, or Charles Burnett's movies are available at all. So it's a great time to be someone digging into all this stuff.
That's right. I love TCM. Yeah.
That's it for this week's Prestige Junkie podcast. This show is edited by Brett Fuchs and co-produced by Brett Fuchs and me. Our theme music is by Dave Gonzalez. Thanks again to my co-host, David Sims. Get the Prestige Junkie newsletter by going to theankler.com and subscribe to this podcast on Apple, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts. We will see you next week. This podcast is brought to you by 20th Century Studios' laugh out loud comedy Quiz Lady. Critics are calling it one of the funniest movies of the year. The New York Times says Sandra Oh shines, and Variety calls Awkwafina hilarious. For consideration in all Emmy categories, Quiz Lady, now streaming on Hulu. TV Academy members can watch the movie on DisneyStudiosAwards.com.